Welcome to the Raven Lunatics episode 2. I'm your host, Dwight McPherson, comic writer, editor, publisher, and I'm joined by...
I'm Chris Setner, curator of the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia.
Awesome. First off, I'd like to thank Matthew Pearl for the amazing interview that he gave us last week. It was fantastic, and if you didn't get a chance to watch it, definitely go back in the archives, our extensive archives, and watch that episode. We discussed the possibility of Poe dying from brain cancer, which I thought was very interesting. I know he had spoken about that in The Guardian, so it was cool to get him so soon after that article was written. But today we are going to be talking about some heavy-duty Poe magic, and that is
Poe pets.
Huh? What's that?
Poe's pets.
Yes, the pets in Poe's life. That's what we're going to be talking about. And I'm so happy to be joined by Chris Sempner because I don't think, in my estimation, Chris is one of the foremost Poe scholars in the world. So, I'm serious. I'm serious. Look at Chris is like, I don't know about that. Chris, why don't you tell us about Poe's pets? What kind of pets did he have?
Well, growing up, Poe had a dog named Tib. Apparently, it made a good impression on him. He included dog characters in his stories. One of his stories, a con artist teaches his dog how to target rich people, and when he sees them coming, to run up and get their shoes dirty, so the con artist gets to shine their shoes. And in the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, there's a Newfoundland dog named Tiger, who's a major character in the first part of the novel. Mm-hmm. But Poe seems to prefer songbirds and cats. And it's said that his foster mother, when he was growing up, had a parrot who knew how to say the alphabet in French. So Poe is always around birds of different kinds, and people describe him having as a parrot and different songbirds that he caught. But he seemed to have preferred cats. And he has a black cat while he's living in Philadelphia, and he wrote an article, Instinct versus Reason, the Black Cat, about how intelligent his cat was. And he described how people at the time thought the cats just survive by instinct. They do what they're programmed to do. But Poe said he had a cat that taught itself how to open a door. And they said it just wasn't a one-step thing. It had to jump, hold itself up, had to turn the latch, and with its forepaws turn the latch, with its hind paws kick open the door. So it's a multi-step process, and this cat, he said he observed it doing it at least 100 times. So he's shown that cats have brains close to our own. And then later he had one called Catarina, a big tortoiseshell cat that used to sit on his shoulder while he wrote, so it might have helped him write some of his stories. So even though Poe wrote about, cutting off cats' tails and plucking out cats' eyeballs and hanging cats and breaking up your cat up behind the wall, he actually loved his cat. And it's said that when he, during the last days of his life, came back to Richmond and just died mysteriously in Baltimore, about the time his mother-in-law learned he was dead, she found out that his cat had also died. And somehow psychically connected to Poe and felt that without him it didn't want to keep living. But one thing about cats we should mention, there's a quote out there on the internet, I wish I could write as mysterious as a cat. Poe never said that, and it's bad grammar anyway. It should be mysteriously, not mysterious.
Right. Maybe Griswold wrote it.
Yeah, it sounds like a Griswoldism.
That's a Griswoldism.
One of Poe's friends here in Richmond said that on his last visit, her dog was chasing the pet cat around the house, and he picked up the cat and petted it, and said, I prefer cats. But a lot of writers seem to like cats. Maybe they keep writers' hours, they stay up all night, and they don't need a lot. They can just go about do their own thing while you're writing, and occasionally they want some food, but most other things, the grooming, they take care of themselves.
Yeah, I definitely can understand that. I mean, as a writer, you really don't want to have to do all the, a lot for your pet, and I can definitely see. I love the painting of the Poe of Poe actually writing, and he has a cat on his shoulders.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who did that painting? Do you remember?
Yeah, I'm not sure who did that one. People have asked me who did it, and I haven't been able to find the name of the artist yet.
Oh
But I'll
wow.
have to keep looking and find out what the original is. But I've seen it published in different books.
Mhm.
I think
If
the most
anybody
recent
knows,
one.
let us know in the comments section. We'd love to know that. Definitely. So, Katerina. But
Yeah,
we
Poe
know,
and the gang loved puns. So,
yeah, he did.
Poe's mother-in-law and his little wife Virginia used to make puns and jokes, and there's a notebook in Enoch Pratt Free Library, which is full of Poe's list of possible subscribers to his proposed magazine.
Mm.
But in the back, there's just a few pages of puns that his mother-in-law wrote on the blank pages.
Oh wow.
So imagine they're sitting around together making corny jokes and playing music together. So
And
that's
that's
Poe.
so different from what historically, or well, what we've been told about Poe. You
Yeah.
know, we don't picture him as this man that's joking and laughing and playing with animals. I mean, we picture him, brooding and you know. So yeah, there's definitely a disparity between the reality and
And
this.
that was a problem even during his lifetime.
Yeah,
When
right.
he lived out in Fordham, which is in the Bronx today,
Mhm.
people would go out to visit him and they'd be surprised he didn't have a pet raven. He wasn't this dark, miserable, mysterious poet. He's just sort of a nice gentleman. And he felt the need to apologize for not having a pet raven. He said, sorry, we just have a cat and some songbirds.
That's
But
funny.
in his day, people did have pet ravens. Most famously, it would be Charles Dickens, who had Grip. And Poe and Dickens met and corresponded.
Mhm.
So we don't know if they ever mentioned Grip during their conversations, but it's nice to think maybe he knew about Grip and he knew about how Dickens went into mourning over the death of Grip. But
Mhm.
also one of Poe's friends in Philadelphia, Henry Beckhurst, owned a pet raven that Poe would have been able to observe, study, and maybe add a little bit of realism to his famous poem. But ravens in literature existed before Poe, so he would have had access to Dickens's Barnaby Rudge.
Mhm.
And then also there's a, a book in our collection that has a story about Ralph the Raven.
Hmm.
It's an anonymous short story in a children's book that Poe's autographed for a young girl. So he would have been reading about ravens and thought, hey, maybe I could do that better. Although it's said that when he was writing the Raven, according to him, he originally thought of using a parrot.
Ooh,
Both
not so
for
dramatic.
kids, nevermore. One of his friends said he originally wanted to use an owl. He said that's why he lands on the pallid bust of Pallas, because an owl is one of the attributes of Athena. But then Poe didn't mention that at all in his essays about writing the Raven. He just mentions the parrot, but he says the colors of the parrot don't really match up to the mood he's trying to get. The parrot would have been too cheerful.
Right. Well, I definitely made the right decision, you know. So, score one for Poe.
Yeah, it would have been quite the holiday Halloween classic if we read about parrots and
The Parrot by Edgar Allan Poe. We might have been reading that one a different time of the year. April Fool's Day, maybe? Yeah?
yeah.
The Parrot? That's awesome. But it's funny though that people would go to his house and expect to, they probably expected to see a raven, a black cat. It's funny. It reminds me of like Alan Moore, what people, think about Alan Moore and how Alan Moore actually is. He's perceived as this dark, brooding kind of, witch. And when you actually meet him, the guy is intelligent. He's down to earth. He's a very cool guy. I mean, I know, some of his family, and he's just, they say, oh man, he's a sweetheart. Don't believe what you hear about him. But it looks like Poe is the same kind of case,
Yeah.
that there's this myth surrounding him, even in his own lifetime. But that's kind of cool. I mean, don't you think? Yeah.
Yeah, and today we associate with Poe with horror typically because you know 20th century is all about horror from the Universal pictures of the 30s. They made the Black Cat, the Version of the Morgue, the Raven up to the 60s with all those Vincent Price adaptations where we really, really associate Poe with horror. But in his day, he also wrote comedies and satires, science fiction, mysteries, even a romance story, although they die in the end, so it's kind of a sad story. But early in his career, one of his advisors, one of his mentors, was telling him he shouldn't really waste his time with horror stories like Berenice. They should stick to the comedies.
Wow.
But today, when he does comedies, are not quite as funny. He's making fun of Andrew Jackson and the Transcendentalist. He's making fun of ancient Greek philosophers. And one of his stories, he thinks it's really funny to call Aristotle Aries Totle. He likes the idea of it being a ram.
Yeah.
And he calls Francis Bacon hog. And that's Poe at the height of humor there. Right. But if you ever do have a chance to read Never Bet the Devil Your Head, be sure to read that one. That's his only story with a moral.
Right. I love that he was so versatile. I mean, that's what I've always, I've always tried to be as versatile and not get pigeonholed into one genre. But it seems like the more versatile writers generally do. I mean, wouldn't you agree that you end up being, he does this really, really well. So that's what type of writer he is. Because I know that happens, especially in comics, a lot. I know, Steve Niles, for instance, a friend of mine. I mean, he writes predominantly horror, but he's written other genres as well. But he's known as a horror writer. So anything outside of that, people are expecting horror in it. But it makes you wonder, I would say not at the beginning of Poe's career, but later in his career after The Raven and some of his horror stories that people were probably expecting, to read more horror by Poe. Would you say that's fair or?
Yeah, and also the market wants you to stick to one thing.
Yeah, that's true.
They want to know what they're getting from you, so they don't want to always have to guess. Is he going to give us a comedy this time, or is he going to give us science fiction? Is this going to be something really lighthearted, really heavy? But that's what Poe is going for. He said that not one of my stories will be like the other one. I want to keep reinventing myself and keep trying new things.
I love that.
When I read his works, I like to see that he's trying different things, and it's always something new, and he's always playing with different ideas, even when it doesn't quite come off. It's kind of nice to see him trying something else, experimenting with form and with character and point of view.
Well, I know that's what I love about him, and you obviously love about him too, is, he was always experimenting, always trying something different, always pushing the boundaries, refusing to be put into this one little, this is Poe here, and this is what he will write, this is what we expect, this is what we're going to get. And he said, you know what, I'm not going to live by your expectations. I'm going to push the boundaries. I love that. I love that about him.
And Marcel Duchamp, who's most famous for putting a urinal on a pedestal and signing and dating it and saying, this is art because it's signed and dated. That's his great claim to fame, is helping define what art is. And he said he was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's idea that originality is just refusing to do what's already been done. So Duchamp said, hey, I've got a chance to be in a show. There's no jury. They're going to accept whatever we submit. I can't possibly get rejected. So I'm going to submit a urinal. I think they still try to reject it, though.
Yeah. That is awesome.
People from all different disciplines have been inspired by Poe. I've worked with dancers who are just fascinated with Poe's works. The Latin Ballet of Virginia did a whole series of dances inspired by Poe's works in his life. But also visual artists, the surrealists, were just fascinated with his variety of ideas. You never knew what was coming up next.
I love that. You know, he definitely pushed the boundaries, and you know, I love that idea of what makes art art, and I love that Poe addressed even that topic. I think that's what we know, those who have spent time studying Poe, but I'm not sure a lot of other people know about that. Poe had a lot to say about a lot of things. You know, I think about his essay on furniture, you know, that he wrote, for instance. I mean, he wrote on a huge topic. The man had a lot to say, and I don't know. I think it's a shame that we just would say that he was a horror writer, or that he just wrote comedy, or or whatever. I think the totality of his work should be examined. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, but I like that people think of him as a horror writer. That even if they come to the museum and think of him as a science fiction writer, a detective writer, but for so long people have looked down upon horror as a genre. They think, oh, that's a second-class genre. Genre fiction, isn't as worthy as literary fiction. But Poe was trying to hold it up to the standards that he held up everything to. And he was a literary critic. He thought a lot about what makes a work of art successful, what makes it work. So he analyzed, well, why does horror work? What makes it effective? Why do we keep reading it? So he kind of legitimized horror, at least tried to legitimize horror, even though if you notice, it's really taken over a century for horror really to be recognized. I think the first horror film to win an Academy Award was in the 90s. It was Silence of the Lambs.
Right. And you see the Oscars now with Guillermo del Toro winning an Oscar, and Get Out winning an Oscar, that horror is finally, at least seeing some more acceptance in the mainstream. So, I think that Edgar Allan Poe would like that.
Yeah, because he said early on he was criticized, just like a lot of horror writers and filmmakers and artists are today, when people would say that, you're just doing the popular Gothic thing, or the German thing, as they called it. And he said that terror is not of Germany, it's of the soul. It's an essential part of what makes us who we are. So that's why it was important for him to exploit that in his stories. He tried to capture the full range of human experience. Right. So that's why we get the comedies, and we also get the dark side of life. And then we get the speculative fiction where he's talking about the future. What's it going to be like in the year 2848? Well, I wrote a story about that, so you could read it and find out.
Right. I love that.
And then he even wrote about pets, whether they be pet cats, pet dogs, pet ravens, or even a little gold bug. Yeah. Technically not a bug. I think it was a beetle, but the story's called The Gold Bug.
Yeah. I've actually been to Fort Moultrie there. I believe we talked about that before with Poe's Tavern in South Carolina. That was really cool to actually be there and know that he served in the Army right there, that he wrote The Gold Bug somewhere close by. It's actually like a gated community where it's rumored that he actually, wrote the story.
So he wouldn't be allowed to live there then?
No, absolutely. He didn't make enough money to live there, right?
No.
He probably couldn't afford Poe's Tavern either, to be honest with you. But we love their little gourmet burgers. We try to get there every time we visit South Carolina.
Well, hopefully if Poe comes back, he'll get free burgers from Poe's Tavern.
He should, right?
That honor.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess he'll probably be a zombie or something, though, so he's probably not interested in burgers, maybe brains or something.
Yeah, he can dine on the patrons.
There you go.
Yeah. All the brains you can eat.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your book. You have a new book. Tell us about your new book.
Oh, it's called The Poe Shrine. And there it is.
Awesome.
And it's a journey through the world of collecting Poe, because what I do is try to use the artifacts from Poe's life, the things that have been preserved over the years, to tell Poe's story. So I'll use things like Poe's socks and exhibit them and say, what can we tell from looking at Poe's socks about who he was? And you'd be surprised if you really look at an artifact and study it, what it can tell you. You can see on the socks where they've been darned and mended. You could imagine his mother-in-law sitting over those socks and saying, Eddie, can't you take better care of your things? But I wanted to look through a whole range of artifacts, things like one of the rare surviving daguerreotypes of Poe, or a lock of his hair, or his vest, and to follow their stories from Poe's time until today. And how is this little walking stick that Poe left at a doctor's house the night he left Richmond on his fateful trip to Baltimore, just before his death? What does that tell us about Poe? And what happened to this thing in all these years after he owned it? Or there's the trunk Poe left in Richmond his last night here. Why did he leave it here? What was in it? Where did it go after he died? Turns out that his literary executor was interested in having all of Poe's manuscripts and books. His sister, who's his closest living relative, and his mother-in-law fought over who got to have the trunk, fought over who got to have Poe's personal possessions. They both got lawyers to help them out. And Poe's mother-in-law was saying, oh, she's not really even his sister. She didn't love him. You know, he was talking smack about her anyway. And then the sister's saying, oh, how could that horrible, evil woman say those things about me? She didn't like him either. And just to see people for generations fighting over these things. And what made them so precious? What made Poe's trunk so precious that these people held on to it? Or Poe's waistcoat, this silk waistcoat that was passed down from his mother-in-law to her niece, down to her family, and how it came to the museum. And I wanted to get into those collectors, those people who sought these things out. The museum started really as early as 1906, but we finally opened in 1922. And one of the driving forces behind it was a collector named James H. Whitty, who wanted to know everything he could possibly know about Poe. He filled thousands and thousands of pages with notes on Poe. We have just 4 boxes full of note cards, but Duke University has his notes on Poe. University of Texas at Austin has some of his collection. And what was he trying to find out? Why was he so obsessed? He wanted to own everything. He wanted to have the desk that Poe wrote at. He wanted to have portraits of Poe. He wanted to have his manuscripts and letters. He wanted to locate all the missing sites, like where was Poe's mother's unmarked grave? Where were all Poe's homes that had been demolished? Where did Poe used to play as a child? And to try to map out these things. He even tried to get a building. He wanted to get the building in which Poe used to work. So imagine you've gone so far as to collect a Poe building. In addition to all your small things like books and manuscripts, you've got a building in which you can house them. And how does his Poe obsession start? And it really started when he was a teenager. He was about 15 years old, and he attended Poe's funeral. The math doesn't sound like it adds up, but Poe's real funeral was 26 years after he died. When Poe died, you know, a couple of his cousins, 7 people showed up, had a private ceremony, and buried him. It was 26 years after Poe's death that his fans got together and had a big ceremony on the big monument you see on his grave today. They moved him across the cemetery, the new spot, the new monument. Walt Whitman spoke. We had Alfred Lord Tennyson and Algernon Swinburne and Stefan Mallarmé sending notes to be read on the occasion. And it was a big to-do, and Whitty was there. He watched all this. You can imagine how this influenced the 15-year-old. And shortly after that, he got into newspaper work. He started contacting anybody who'd ever known Poe. And, you know, imagine, this isn't even 30 years after Poe's dead, so a lot of these people were still alive. He was able to contact Poe's last fiancée and ask her what Poe was like. He was able to contact all these people in Poe's life and find out everything he could about the author. And he became driven to collect. He boasted that he had the world's largest collection of Poe artifacts. And that's the subtitle of the book, Building the World's Finest Edgar Allan Poe Collection. What led him to do this? What led him to start this new museum? And what kind of person was he? And then what made him give it all up? He gave it all up because he wanted a portrait of Poe's first love. Her name was Jane Stith Craig Stannard. She was the woman Poe called the first purely ideal love of my soul. He dedicated his poem to Helen to her. He thought she was Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman that ever lived. And Whitty wanted this portrait. He wouldn't give it to the museum. He said, I'm keeping this for myself. But the other founders of the museum said, you know what? You're the head of our acquisitions committee. You were supposed to be getting things for us, not for yourself. So he said, no, too bad. I'm keeping it. So they said, okay, well, too bad. You're kicked out. You can't come back anymore. So then he took his Poe desk. They banned him from the museum for life. They said that they'd arrest him if he ever entered the museum. But all for this little portrait. And this portrait he didn't publish. He didn't reproduce. He just took it off its stretcher, rolled up the canvas, and stuck it in his desk. And nobody really saw it until after he died. It wasn't published until years after his death. And by then we found out it was never a picture of Jane Stannard. He'd been tricked. Or somehow he tricked himself. It didn't even look like her. She was supposed to have dark hair. This woman in the portrait had blonde hair. He didn't even fit the description, but for some reason he had to have the portrait at the expense of everything else. I want to know what made Whitty tick. What made him who he was? Then there were other founders, John W. Robertson, and he ran a mental hospital in California. It's a Livermore Insane Asylum. And he became fascinated with Poe for different reasons. This was the 1920s, and there was an interest in Freudian interpretations of Poe's works. So he wrote a book called Edgar Allan Poe, A Psychopathic Study, to try to figure out the workings of Poe's mind. This is his field of interest. Another side project was he wanted to produce the first ever bibliography of all of Poe's first printings. So he started collecting any first printing of a Poe story you could possibly find, any first edition. And another interest was he was a spiritualist. He was of this generation that was holding seances and trying to communicate with the other side. So his book, A Psychopathic Study, soon became a study of Poe's clairvoyant powers. He thought that Poe was some kind of clairvoyant who could control people's mind using mesmerism, and that his stories include references to his ability to go into a hypnotic trance state. Kind of like Edgar Casey used to go into a trance to try to communicate with the other side. This guy thought that Poe could do the same thing. So this is another one of the founders. He lived in California, but he was interested in the Poe Museum early on and gave his whole collection to the museum. Sent the museum 100 violets to be placed on the grave of Jane Stannard. He actually got so many violets they wouldn't fit. It was way too many. And there's another great founder, Annie Boyd Jones, and her husband owned a church envelope company. And the other little envelopes they give out at church, so you put your tithes and offering in it. He invented a new kind of envelope that had two pockets in it. So you could give one for the building fund and one for the missionary fund, all with the same envelope. But he was an atheist. He made his fortune off of selling envelopes to churches. And it was her idea to create a Poe shrine. And some of the other founders said, won't this be offensive to people who are religious to have a shrine to Poe? But she thought this was a perfect idea, and she wanted to recreate one of the poems of Poe's called To One in Paradise. That starts out, thou wast that all to me, love, for which my soul did pine. A green isle and the sea, love, a fountain and a shrine. All wreathed with fairy fruits and flowers, and all the flowers are mine. So she created a garden with a fountain and a shrine. she spared no expense. She used bricks that were salvaged from different buildings where Poe lived and worked, the hardscape, the garden. She planted flowers and trees and shrubs that are mentioned in Poe's poems and short stories. Saved ivy from Poe's mother's grave and boxwoods from a place in Dinwiddie County that Poe visited. Wherever she could, she tried to bring Poe's world into her little Poe shrine. So those are just a few of the founders, and the book follows how they try to collect things. Usually Whitty would write someone, they ignore him, then he'd write them again. He'd say, well, aren't you a relative of Poe's mother-in-law's sister's cousin's friend? And do you have any Poe artifacts I could get, or can you connect me with somebody else who's connected with Poe? And before you know it, they're writing back and forth, and he would try to ingratiate himself to one person or others. Oftentimes he'd alienate people, so then Annie Jones would go in and smooth things over, and it was this quest to find leads. What's the next lead for another Poe artifact? How do I get it? And then how they survived through the Great Depression. And they survived by the assistance of Mary Gavin Traylor. And she was another colorful character. She was a society writer for the Richmond News Leader, the local newspaper. And she was the daughter of a Poe collector. And she remembered that early on, about 1905, her father's prized Poe daguerreotype had been damaged, irreparably repaired. So 30 years later, she had devoted herself to trying to get a Poe daguerreotype for the museum when she had a chance. She contacted any friend she could to try to raise money to get this Poe daguerreotype before it fell in the hands of one of the wealthier Poe collectors. There were Poe collectors in Baltimore and Philadelphia, New York were competing for these things. So how was she going to try to outsmart them and get this artifact before they could?
Wow.
And another one of the museum directors, this is back in the 70s, he worked on the Manhattan Project. So they dropped the atomic bomb on his 25th birthday.
Wow.
So he was a physicist by training, became obsessed with Poe's book about cosmology and the universe called Eureka. And that's what got him into Poe. And he was working up until his death on writing a book about Eureka, trying to interpret it from a physicist's point of view. But unfortunately, we've lost any notes that he might have made for it. We got about 17 boxes of his files after he died. We never able to find any of his notes for that book or any manuscript for it. But he added more things to the collection, like Poe's boyhood bed. The bed's another great example of the kind of artifact that fascinates me. This is where little Edgar used to sleep when he was growing up. And one of his good friends mentioned that one of Poe's greatest fears when he was a kid was that while he was lying in that bed at night, he would hear a noise from across the room and was terrified that someone out there in the darkness was watching him. And he would pull his covers over his head so tight he couldn't even breathe. For some reason, as long as you're underneath the covers, you're protected from the boogeyman. So how did that experience, how that fear feed into the Telltale Heart? That's kind of what this book's about. So it tells Poe's story, and it tells the story of the artifacts, and then it tells the story of the collectors who devoted themselves to finding these things and to bringing them to the Poe Museum. So there's 3 stories there, but it's all sort of told from the point of view of the artifacts.
That's fascinating. Definitely fascinating. Where can people buy the book?
You can get it at the Poe Museum gift shop or on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. So it's pretty widely available.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you this. Is there any other artifacts that are known that are maybe owned by private collectors at this time that you know of?
Oh, yeah, there's some great ones out there. There is the engagement ring that Poe gave to his very last fiancée, Elmira Royster Shelton, shortly before his death, and has his name inscribed on the inside of it. and that's in a private collection. There are two pieces of fabric cut from Poe's wife's trousseau, actually pieces of fabric from her dress that still exist in a private collection. We displayed them at the museum a couple of years ago, but they would be a great addition to the collection. But there's still things out there, and hopefully people still know what they have, because it belonged to one family, then they pass it down to the next generation. The next generation might have forgotten what it was, but you never know what you're going to find. A couple of years ago, we got Poe's penknife with his name inscribed on the side there, a little silver plate. And he doesn't mention the penknife in his writing, but there's a private collector who had this, who inherited it and passed down through the family. And there's a story that way back down the line, one of his ancestors got it from Poe in exchange for a loan. Poe never paid back the loan, so the guy kept this little penknife and passed it on down to his kids.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Archaeology to me. So I love the idea of having the artifacts and actually seeing what we can learn from them. That's what archaeologists, part of what they do. So that's fascinating.
And these are really witnesses to history. These are the things that were there. So there are little windows back in time. It almost helps transport us back in time. We can almost get the feel we're looking over Poe's shoulder while he wrote. We're trying to learn about his inspirations, what he was trying to do, and hopefully we can use some of that information to inspire new generations of creative thinkers.
Right. That's I know that when I actually visited the cottage, I had that real feeling to actually walk in his, where he had walked, and to look around the rooms that he looked around in. And I know that was I felt a strong connection with him doing that. And seeing the bed, where it said that Virginia died, and how tiny, and that room was. And I know in my comic, I've romanticized it as well, but to actually see how small that room is, and to see that little chair, and to see the little bed, you get a connection that you can't get just from reading his work. So I really appreciate the Poe Museum. I loved, we loved our trip over there, and we are definitely going to get back over there soon. And I know that we're supporters, and we'll continue to support the Poe Museum, because I think that's so important. And people can actually go there and see things that Poe used and that he wore, and hopefully give people a better understanding. It's well done, and I had a amazing person that showed me through the museum. He seemed to know a little bit about Poe, so that helped as well. But what's going on with the Poe Museum now? I heard there's something going on over there.
Well, we just rearranged the exhibits, and the last time we made a major rearrangement was 2012. So it's good to freshen things up once in a while and improve the flow for our visitors. And it also gives us an excuse to bring out some artifacts that aren't always on display. So right now we've added some of the scripts from plays in which Poe's parents performed, a review of Poe's father, a review of Poe's mother, so we get contemporary opinions. And that might not sound too exciting, but it's just another aspect. Who were Poe's parents? What influence did they have on his life? They died when he was 2 years old, but how did their legacy affect him later? He had to bear that stigma of having been the son of actors. And what did that mean? And why did he become so fascinated with learning everything he could about his mother, and trying to track down any newspaper clippings about her and anybody who'd seen her perform? He said that to have known my mother is to be a person of special interest to me. Why did he want to know so much about her? He never really remembered her, but he wanted to learn everything he could. So I think adding that little chapter to the museum's displays sheds a little bit more light on it.
Sure, and I everybody wants to know where he comes from. So it's not an unusual thing that he would want to know his mother. once again, like you were saying, it helps people connect better to him. To actually, that's why I love the Poe Museum, and we need to get. I know I said it already,
Yeah,
but
you
we
gotta
really
just do it.
we definitely
Yeah,
need.
we're convenient to Washington, D.C. We're only 2 hours south of D.C. and about 2.5 hours south of Baltimore, 4 hours from Philadelphia, about 6 hours from New York, right on I-95. And also, we now have a whole room devoted to Poe's death and the mystery surrounding Poe's death. And thanks to Jeff Jerome up in Baltimore, we even have on loan some of the bottles of cognac that the Poe toaster left on Poe's grave, and a note that the Poe toaster left. So you get to read the words of the mysterious Poe toaster, whose claim to fame is that he, starting about 1950, just started visiting Poe's grave every year on his birthday in the middle of the night, and people started gathering around him to watch. Every year, like the great pumpkin, he would arise from the shadows. He'd have a toast on Poe's grave. He'd leave 3 roses and half a bottle of cognac. And in 1993, he left a note, so we have that little note that he left, saying that the torch would be passed. This tradition must continue. And the tradition continued until 2009. So at least 3 generations of his family did that, and we have some of those pieces on display. We also have an art exhibit, original drawings by Nicole Pisaniello, illustrating Poe's stories, Lygia and the Island of the Fae. If you want to check out those things, we still have our temporary exhibit, Unsolved Mysteries of Edgar Allan Poe, which explores some more of those unsolved mysteries of his life. So you want to come and see the whole thing. And then if you're in town, April 26th, we have the first unhappy hour of the season. It's kind of like happy hour, except it's at the Poe Museum, so it's really miserable. If you really want to get depressed and drown your sorrows, it's a great place to come after work from 6 to 9. We have it the 4th Thursday of every month from April through October. And each month we have live music and a cash bar, food by local restaurants. Often we'll have performances of Poe's works with exhibit openings. There's always something new, so there's a reason to keep coming back and checking it out. And then we're also collaborating with the Dark Raven Museum.
I was going to ask you about that.
VR, virtual reality, artificial intelligence Poe, and Poe will be your tour guide, taking you through this experience of some of his stories. So we'll have more details on that coming in April, but it's Poe as you've never seen before.
And that's fascinating.
And what's up with you and the imaginary voyages of Edgar Allan Poe?
Well, we are just waiting to get issue 3 back from the printer. We have pins that are coming in from China. Our prints are back. Everything is lining up. We're getting ready to send everything out. And Peter, our wonderful tech magician, has helped us get magnets as well for this project. And let me see, May 1st, we're going to reveal the cover by John Boy Myers, who's done work for DC and Marvel, and he's a phenomenal person and artist. And it's really neat to see him in his style draw Edgar Allan Poe and Irving Radd. So we're wrapping this up, getting ready to send everything out, and then May 1st we'll reveal the cover, and then June 1st another Kickstarter. So
you guys have had phenomenal success with the Kickstarters. Didn't you fund the last one in 2 hours?
Yeah, it was 2 hours to fund the last one, and that's but it's just like we're talking about here, and why we wanted to have this show. People love Poe all around the world. Whether it's we send a book to a reader in Cyprus or to Russia or to the Middle East or all around the world. People love Poe, and people are drawn to Poe, and that's that's why we wanted to do this show. This is why I wanted to do this show with you, because I think it gives a broader audience, access to get some of your extensive knowledge. And that's not to hype you up, but I mean, you put in the time and you're passionate about Poe. So it's really an honor to do this show with you. So I didn't intend to, to pump you up. But it's true. I really appreciate you doing the show. And I know that, I've had so many comments from people that have watched the show, all two of them, as you like to say.
Oh, both of them?
Yeah, but they've really went out of their way to express how much they've enjoyed the show, and they've enjoyed your input and your knowledge. So, thanks for me as well. So I know you've been a huge help to me in writing The Imaginary Voyages of Edgar Allan Poe. So this is fun. I'm enjoying myself. I know we've got some awesome guests lined up in the future. We're working on that as well, getting some more guests on here, some artists, some writers, and we're always looking for people that are knowledgeable that would like to come on and share how Poe has influenced them, their work. I've actually talked with a filmmaker as well about appearing on the show. So I think the future looks mighty bright for the Raven Lunatics. What do you think?
Yeah, so the two of you that are watching, keep watching and tell your friends. But you never know what you're going to find next, and we want to keep this open to the variety of people inspired by Poe. And no matter where you're from, we're interested in having you on the show and having your input, because we would like to have this a forum for all the Poe people out there. And hopefully the result will be that people will be inspired and illuminated, and who knows what will come next.
Absolutely.
And maybe we'll have some more people come and talk about Poe's pets.
Sure. Well, I know we have big plans for this, where we want to go with this. So, if we can get people involved and people watching, subscribe to our channel, share about the video, like them, leave us comments, leave questions. Want to ask a question of a renowned Poe scholar? Ask away. Want to ask a question about
ask Dwight.
or ask me something about comics. I know a thing or two, but we just are here to celebrate Poe and to celebrate his work and the impact that still is so, it's impossible to overstate how much impact that he still continues to have on people and on media. So we definitely want to, open this show up to anybody that would like to come on and talk about what impact Poe has had on them. Any creative type people, any dancers, come on, get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. So I think that's all I've got. Have you got anything else, Chris?
Nah, just join us. Same Poe time, same Poe channel.
We will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you for watching the Raven Lunatics.
All right. Thanks for watching.